British companies with presence in the Philippines include Shell, GlaxoSmithKline, and Unilever. Joining us now for a check on the investment climate here, Chairman Chris Nelson of the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, joining us from our Rockwell studio. Good to have you back on, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, very nice to be back, Kathy. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. First off, we've all been riveted here. The exit polls revealing Prime Minister May's gamble may have failed just days to the Brexit talks. What impact do you think might the political shifts have on Britain's push to trade more, invest more overseas, including the Philippines?
Well, yeah, obviously the polls are still, the results are just coming in. The exit poll would say that the current administration will have a majority, but will it be a workable majority? That remains to be seen. I think almost regardless of the eventual results, the push for trade and trade agreements will continue. That's got to be the emphasis, and we see it here in the Philippines. We've obviously been driving trade, particularly through small to medium-sized enterprises.
Yeah, the Philippines over the last 3 weeks has seen some of its own event risks, from Marawi fighting to the martial rule in Mindanao. In what way are these influencing the small and medium enterprises, the way British firms see political and security risks in the Philippines?
Well, look, all firms are obviously going to be governed in terms of security by advice from the embassy and the appropriate authorities. But however, companies, when they plan, are looking at the long term. And I think what's much more important to them, actually, is really the landscape, the regulation, and also what's happening in terms of the economic front. Yesterday, we had, in conjunction with our partner European chambers, we had a conference, the Joint Economic Briefing, and there the emphasis was on how are we going to progress and where is the drive, obviously linking it into the government's mantra, build, build, build on infrastructure. So I think it's all about how can they set up business. Of course, people will be conscious, but long term people look at the business prospects.
And what sort of prospects are you seeing with the passage in Congress of the tax reform bill? How does it apply to businesses from Britain?
Well, like in respect to the tax business, the tax reforms, which obviously have passed the lower house and now going to the Senate, first of all, I think there are some positives. Obviously, lower corporate tax, lower income tax, and that'll be a big boost, I believe, actually, to obviously the middle class sector, and therefore there could be a lot in terms of purchases for retail goods. That's been quite a growth sector for British goods. Clearly, where there are challenges are, one, of course, on the BPO sector, where obviously they're going to be looking at removing advantage of incentives, and then obviously British companies have been very strong there. And of course you've got automobiles and obviously beverages, which could be impacted. But obviously we'll have to see what the Senate comes with in terms of how they will treat some of those increases.
So far with what we've been seeing, in the bill that's already passed Congress, is it a net negative for the BPO, the automobiles, the beverage companies from Britain?
I would say if you look at the automobiles, obviously that's going to be the higher end, and yes, that would be. In terms of food and the beverages, it obviously depends. That's really impacted by the sugar tax and the content of that. In terms of BPOs, I think they will still come. Let's look at the advantage of BPO, and maybe it'll be less of an incentive, but I think in terms of companies we've seen set up, they're looking for obviously other wins in terms of the skill, the sales force here, and now they can support businesses back there. So that's how I see it falling out currently under the current bill.
Now, big picture now, Chris, what is the status of the free trade talks between the UK and the Philippines?
Well, first of all, we are still part of, obviously, the European Union, and it's the European Union that actually is conducting the negotiation on the FTA, and we'll still be involved with that. Now, no one knows when that's going to continue and when it's going to finish. Once that's over, or we've already withdrawn, then obviously we have to negotiate our own agreements. Now, we're very positive on getting agreements not only here but across the world. So Also, I'd have to put it into the conjecture of what's going on today in the elections, of course. And in terms of the real negotiations on Brexit, that's really going to have to start, supposed to be, I think, the next 11 days. So, but overall, I would say there's going to be a clear focus on getting trade agreements around the world, and the Philippines will be one of the priorities.
And indeed, you have begun, because back in March, we talked about taking British companies to Mindanao and a visit to Davao. They're considering Mindanao as a new investment destination. But have their views or timetables changed about Mindanao, given the protracted fighting in Marawi and the martial rule there?
Well, first of all, obviously, we're all very concerned about Marawi. We'd obviously hope to see the situation improve as well as it can do in the short term. We feel a great deal of sympathy for everybody involved. In terms of our looking at Mindanao, I still think we look at that at the long term. We built up a very good relationship with the Davao Chamber. They're actually hosting an investment conference on the 20th to the 21st of July. And we're going to go there and support it. We've been invited. Again, when we look at investments, we look at the longer term, and we think Mindanao is an opportunity, as are other places outside Metro Manila.
So what other economic reforms do the British companies want to see in the Philippines to make it more conducive for business in the long term?
Well, I would actually come back to the own government's 10-point economic plan. And I think all the chambers are very supportive of that plan. And in particular, I talk about opening up on the foreign direct investment, which means, of course, loosening up the foreign negative investment list. I mean, that was discussed yesterday in the Economic Forum. We saw the plans in that forum being presented by the Department of Transport. Also, we had Dole there. There are a lot of companies in the UK, and I'm sure in Europe, who are happy to invest. And I think if that can be moved upon and accelerated, and even look at what regulations can be done today, you'll see a lot more companies coming.
So you think it stalled the plan to amend the Foreign Investment Act?
I beg your pardon, repeat the question, I'm sorry.
It's stalled for now. I mean, there hadn't been any discussions on amending the FIA.
There hasn't been. I mean, what we'd like to see is what they can do, first of all, in terms of their own regulations, in terms of accelerating foreign direct investment. I mean, foreign direct investment did grow, but as a percentage compared across the rest of ASEAN, it's much lower. What can they do in the short term, and how can they accelerate the longer term to amend those rules? We're all very supportive.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that update. Chris Nelson, the chair of the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, thank you so much for joining us, as well as Gunter Taz for joining us there in our Rockwell studio.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.